Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Stephen Olakara. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me back. Great to be back on the show. And shout out to all the Rising viewers I've seen over the last few months. But I'll say one thing, this was not a slow news weekend. I know we have a lot to get to.
No, we have a lot. And Robbie is off drinking a Negroni in Italy. So we're going to try to cover it all for you. First up, President Trump's big, beautiful bill is making strides toward the finish line, but there are still hurdles to clear.
On Saturday, the bill did pass a key Senate measure, allowing it to advance in a debate and vote.
Two Republican senators, Thom Tillis and Rand Paul, voted against the bill. Tillis cited his issue with the bill's proposed Medicaid cuts, which he says would cost his state almost $40 billion in funding.
Paul, on the other hand, opposed the $5 trillion debt ceiling increase. Democrats, of course, had complaints of their own, and they all voted no. Here's Senator Chuck Schumer this weekend.
Republicans are about to pass the single most expensive bill in U.S. history to give tax breaks to billionaires while taking away Medicaid, SNAP benefits, and good-paying jobs for millions of people.
Democrats also stalled the debate this weekend by forcing a full reading of the 940-page bill on the Senate floor. Senator Elizabeth Warren posted on X at 2 in the morning that she was on her way to the Capitol to force the reading, adding, quote, "This bill will rip health care coverage away from 16 million people and cut food assistance. It's sick, and we will not stand for it."
Notably, Senator Mike Lee pulled his proposal to sell federal land for housing after getting pushback from members of his own party. Republicans carried on, however, popping up all over the media this weekend, promoting and praising the bill. Here is Senator Lindsey Graham on the Senate floor.
It's a big, beautiful bill if you believe in cutting people's taxes, securing the border, having a strong military, and controlling government spending.
Former Trump official Elon Musk couldn't resist trashing the bill, writing on X, quote, "The latest Senate draft bill will destroy millions of jobs in America and cause immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane and destructive. It gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future."
Right now, there's what's called a vote-a-rama happening in the Senate. If the bill passes, it will head back to the House, where almost every Republican will have to vote in favor for it to pass. President Trump wrote on Truth Social today at 2 in the morning, "One great big beautiful bill is moving along nicely. Make America great again." All right, lots to cover here, obviously. The Senate making its way towards sending this back to the House through this vote-a-rama. But there's been some tension along the way, too, right? Trump threatening to primary Thom Tillis after he voted against the bill, with Tillis then shortly announcing after that he wasn't seeking re-election.
That's right. Well, first of all, I spent extra time trying to find things in the One Big Beautiful Bill that I could support, and there is a no tax on tips provision, so I support that. Outside of it, this is a complete monstrosity of a bill. The way that's going to increase the debt, as Senator Rand Paul and others have spoken to, I think is a huge problem. And on top of that, I actually had naively perhaps some hope that this administration, Elon Musk and Doge, might be able to take on the military-industrial complex. That is not happening. The military-industrial complex has beat Donald Trump. It has beat Elon Musk. This bill would increase spending for the Pentagon by hundreds of billions of dollars, $1 trillion budget for the first time ever in history. And I think that, among many things, is a problem. You've heard Senator Warren, for example, talking about people are going to lose Medicaid funding. You mentioned Senator Thom Tillis. He pointed out one of the reasons why he is opposing this bill are the cuts to Medicaid and how that's going to impact rural hospitals in his state. A number of these hospitals rely on that funding to stay alive, and they're going to be closing down. That's not good for rural Americans.
I appreciate your point about the military-industrial complex. I do think defense spending was a huge missed opportunity for Republicans here, especially as you have an increasing number of the party's base, particularly among young people, who are very skeptical of foreign entanglements, who are very worried about what's happening with Iran and Israel and Trump's decision to strike Iran, and wanting to see that money pulled back or at least used more efficiently and effectively for keeping America first in mind. And that doesn't seem to be the case in this bill. I do think there are some good things in the bill. For one, border security is funded very significantly in this bill, which is a huge part of the president's agenda. I do think on the point about Medicaid funding for the states being pulled back, I understand the argument that some states have against that, but I also appreciate that they are adding this able-bodied work requirement, that they are making sure that it's not going, well, depending on what they decide to do with the parliamentarian and how they rewrite that clause, not allowing Medicaid to go to non-citizens seems like it makes sense to me. So I don't think it's all bad, but it certainly is not what we thought it was going to be when Trump was talking about it back in January or February.
That's right. And part of the issue here, that why you're seeing at least a few Republicans rebelling from Trump on this, is just because there really was a hope that we could take on debt and deficits in a real and serious way. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, their projections. These bills are scored on a 10-year basis.
Right.
There are a lot of assumptions there. And I can actually sympathize with some of the critiques from the right on the CBO scoring. There are a lot of things that can happen. But if you look at how this bill is structured, the vast majority of the spending is in the first 5 years, and any potential savings are really going to be in the latter 5 years. And I took an important note, I think, from Senator Paul on, given all of the uncertainty with those assumptions, let's at least look at the next year. And in the next fiscal year, it's increasing the deficit by $270 billion. That is a for sure thing. And I think anyone who's a fiscal conservative can look at that and say, that's not good for our country.
That's an important point that you make. Thomas Massie pointed out the same thing in an interview that I did with him on, I believe it was Thursday, where he talked about how he could get to a yes on the big, beautiful bill. And he had this exact same problem raised with the CBO scoring. It's on a 10-year window. And the no tax on tips, the no tax on overtime, the tax reform for seniors all expire after 3 years. So that adds to the deficit, right? When you have a tax cut, that adds to the deficit because it's lower revenue that you're bringing in. So when you score on a 10-year basis, suddenly that 3-year no tax on X, Y, and Z doesn't add to the deficit the way that it would if you were scoring on a 3 to 5 year basis. But let's be real, is Congress really going to vote or not vote to extend those provisions? No, nobody wants to see a tax increase once those things are already enshrined into law. It's the same trick that they did with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was that they made the corporate tax cut permanent while making the tax cuts for the middle class temporary, so that there would be more political pressure later on to get senators and congressmen to vote for that extension, while also making sure that the bill was technically deficit neutral.
Yeah, well, once you have spending or tax cuts, it's very likely that those things are going to continue. The only constituency that doesn't get to, I think, benefit from that kind of situation are young people like yourself and me, who are going to be carrying this debt burden longer term. And so whether it's a Democratic or Republican president, there's always going to be more and more deficit and debt spending, whether it's actual spending or tax cuts. And that's just not healthy. And I think when you look at what Senator Paul and Thomas Massie and others are trying to say, I think they are trying to be consistent. And I hate to see what's happening with Thom Tillis, because we need more independent-minded senators who are able to critique these bills when it's so massive and bloated as it is. It's really hard to have a rational discussion. And I would be in favor, by the way, of splitting this into smaller pieces so we can actually discuss and debate each piece.
That's another thing Massie has proposed, which is having the president's agenda priorities in one bill and having the tax cut in there, and then having a separate bill for all the other spending, essentially.
Yes. All right, can't take the heat. The Republicans seeking re-election after Trump launched a series of Truth Social attacks at him over the weekend. Senator Thom Tillis announcing over the weekend that he will not be seeking re-election in 2026. It comes after the North Carolina Republican broke with this party over Trump's big, beautiful bill, saying prior to the vote that he would not support it.
That move prompted a wave of attacks from the president. Trump, in a Truth Social post, writing in part, North Carolina will not allow one of their senators to grandstand in order to get some publicity for himself for a possible but very difficult re-election. America wants reduced taxes, including no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security. interest deductions on cars, border security, a strong military, and a bill which is great for our farmers, manufacturers, and employment in general. Thom Tillis is making a big mistake for America and the wonderful people of North Carolina. Trump followed that up with this post after the vote. Thom Tillis has hurt the great people of North Carolina. Even on the catastrophic flooding, nothing was done to help until I took office. Then a miracle took place. Tillis is a talker and a complainer, not a doer.
Then on Sunday, Tillis announced that he would not be seeking re-election. Tillis said, in part, quote, "I haven't exactly been excited about running for another term. The choices between spending another 6 years navigating the political theater and partisan gridlock in Washington or spending that time with the love of my life, Susan, our 2 children, 3 beautiful grandchildren, and the rest of our extended family back home. It's not a hard choice, and I will not be seeking re-election."
Trump taunted him, saying, "Great news! Senator Thom Tillis will not be seeking re-election." But Tillis didn't stay quiet about who should replace him. Take a look at what he had to say just a few hours after the president's final jab. He wrote, "Thanks for the retirement wishes, Mr. President. Looking forward to working with you for a successful 2026. Words to the wise, let's avoid mini soldier." Mini soldier made in reference to former Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, who Trump endorsed in the North Carolina governor's race last November. During that race, Robinson was linked to the handle Mini Soldier on several online accounts, including a pornographic website where he made a series of inflammatory remarks on a message board, including proclaiming himself a black Nazi and expressing support for reinstating slavery.
All right, well, first, when you look at Senator Thom Tillis and what he's pointing to with the political theater and the partisan gridlock in the Senate, I actually think we should take a moment to discuss that a bit, because when you see a number of these Republicans who've left both the House and the Senate over the last number of years, many of them point to those exact issues. They come in wanting to make a difference. They witness the kind of theater you need to do to stay in office. You have to toe the party line. And if you oppose MAGA, if you oppose Trump at any point, you're going to get a well-funded primary opponent. And I think Thom Tillis' race already was going to be one of the vulnerable re-election races in the United States. The DNC chair, Ken Martin, had already targeted North Carolina as a top pickup opportunity. And so you're saying to yourself, if you're Thom Tillis, do I really want to go through a bruising general election battle again? And then now, as a result of voting against this bill, go through a bruising primary battle, which I can say as a former candidate for U.S. Senate, those are not fun experiences at all. And so I do think that we need to be thinking about how we can incentivize more independent-minded senators. I recently ran into former Congressman Mike Gallagher and Will Hurd recently in D.C., and kind of like an endangered species, not too many Republicans like them still in office.
Yeah, and look, I mean, part of it, though, is not just Trump, but the voters, right? North Carolina is a unique place, as is Kentucky with Thomas Massey. But I do think that over the past 10 years, since Trump really rose to prominence, you do see a lot of maybe the squishier, more moderate Republicans getting primaried by the voters. And that's not just a money thing. Like, money alone can't buy an election, right? That's an ideology thing, and people wanting to have people who are voting with President Trump. Now, all of that being said, I think that this one thing being the reason that Trump turned on Thom Tillis is a little bit over dramatic. I'm curious to see who they decide to run in this now open primary. I've heard 2 names.
Yeah.
I've heard Laura Trump, of course, but she's in Florida now and has like a million shows, so I'm not sure how that's going to work. But the other one is RNC Chair Michael Whatley.
Yep. Yeah, and so we'll see which candidate they put up, and it'll probably be a competitive race. I still think it's so funny how quickly the announcement came from Thom Tillis. Like, sometimes you see a senator, a member of Congress, who challenges their party, the heat gets a little too hot, and then maybe weeks later, months later, this is what happened with Mike Gallagher, for example, they say they're not going to seek re-election or they resign a little bit early. No time was lost in this case. This was hours later, Senator Tillis saying that he's not going to run for re-election. And so I actually tried to find out a little bit more on what's really going on there. And my sense of the situation is that when you oppose President Trump on a signature domestic policy priority, we live in a time where members of Congress and senators are actively getting death threats. Their families their safety is at risk. You're getting a ton of verbal abuse, both online and in traditional media. And I think he immediately wanted to try and prevent as much of that as possible by saying, hey guys, I'm not going to be running for re-election. One interesting thing to watch, though, will be the next 18 months, because he has already signaled this publicly, he's going to be able to be even more independent-minded. He's going to be able to call balls and strikes how he sees them. He has no political pressures. He doesn't have any fundraising pressures, which often, we have a system of legalized bribery in Congress. So if you don't have that fundraising pressure, you can truly call the issues how you see them and be an independent senator, which I think Americans will benefit from. I also, by the way, got to quickly point out, part of the reason why these primary challenges are so difficult for Republican senators, and you see it on the Democratic side as well, is because many states have closed primaries and partisan primaries. If we want to see more members of Congress represent the broad general public of the United States, I believe we need to open up those primaries. And I think Thom Tillis, I don't know if it would have changed his decision in this place because he had a tough general election, but it allows him to not be always looking over his shoulder at a far-right opponent.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Like I said, North Carolina is an interesting place. The last Senate election, 2022, Ted Budd beat out Sherry Beasley by, 3 points? So it was very close, right? And that was in a cycle where Republicans were predicted to perform very well. Everyone was talking about the red wave that never happened. Now Republicans are dealing with a more politically challenging climate heading into 2026 in a state that is increasingly purple and has elected blue governors pretty consistently over the past few cycles. I do think no matter who it is that runs to replace Thom Tillis is going to have an uphill battle. It's going to be a real dogfight, I think, in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's true. You're going to have, the research triangle, you have a lot of blue or purple voters moving in to that area. But it also comes down to whether the Democrats can field a good candidate as well. True. I've noticed that the Democratic Party has had trouble being an effective opposition party over the last 6 months. So even though this is a pickup opportunity, I'm not convinced they're not going to shoot themselves in the foot.
That's a fair point. All right, next up, Chief Justice John Roberts issued a warning to lawmakers using heated rhetoric against judges. That's next. Chief Justice John Roberts spoke out against lawmakers who use heated rhetoric and warned about the rise of violent threats against judges.
Here's Roberts at the Judicial Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I've been compelled over the past few years to make statements about people on one side of the aisle, their reviews on judges, and on the other side. It's not politically associated in any way with one side or the other. The danger, of course, is somebody might pick up on that, and we have had, of course, serious threats of violence and murder of judges just simply for doing their work. So I think the political people on both sides of the aisle need to keep that in mind.
The Supreme Court last week handed President Trump a major win by limiting district court judges from issuing nationwide injunctions. In the 6-3 ruling along ideological lines, the justices said that for the most part, judges can't grant relief past the people who brought the lawsuit in the first place. For the relief to extend beyond the immediate people involved, the lawsuit would have to convert into a class action.
The legal battle was over Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship to children born to parents who are illegal immigrants or on short-term visas. Notably, Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Amy Coney Barrett sparred in their dueling arguments. Justice Jackson called the ruling an existential threat to the rule of law and wrote in part, quote, "It is not difficult to predict how this all ends. Eventually, executive power will become completely uncontainable and our beloved constitutional republic will be no more."
Justice Barrett, on the other hand, argued, "We observe only this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary. No one disputes that the executive has a duty to follow the law, but the judiciary does not have unbridled authority to enforce this obligation. In fact, sometimes the law prohibits the judiciary from doing so." So obviously a huge win for Trump in this birthright citizenship case, which was confusing to some people because it's not really about birthright citizenship, but about the use of nationwide injunctions to block policies coming from the executive branch. There's been something like 60 to 70, it could be even higher, I'm guesstimating here, nationwide injunctions against some of President Trump's executive orders. So for those to be limited in scope or to be lifted entirely is obviously hugely important for his domestic policy agenda.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know commentators on the left and right have been pointing out that liberal justices have previously called out these nationwide injunctions.
Yeah, Elena Kagan in particular.
And now they're in favor of it. I've been consistent on this. I think it's important from a checks and balances and separation of power standpoint that these district court judges can issue nationwide injunctions to allow, for there to be separation of powers. I think that's super important. And I think in Democratic presidents, you see justices talk about this, and often you see it flipped under Republican presidents. Now, I saw Scott Jennings on CNN call out, I think it was Justice Jackson, for being, or Kagan, for being a partisan hack. And if he wants to use that term, he should definitely apply it to Justice Thomas and a number of the conservative justices who've been absolutely partisan hacks over the next few years, not to mention some of the ethical issues they've had. So I think very few justices have been consistent, including on this issue. The other thing, the other piece of this issue, of course, is dealing with birthright citizenship, which is in the Constitution. And I think it's not conservative, not libertarian, not a constitutional originalist position to want to end that. I think it's been settled law for a long time. So I think that piece of the issue is problematic as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been settled for like 30 or 40 years, but certainly not since the conception of America. And I think the question is that phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what does that actually mean? And I actually think it's really great that the Supreme Court is going to finally settle that matter, because it has been kind of fuzzy for a long time. But I wanted to ask about your claim that justices like Alito and Thomas have been partisan hacks. What are some of the examples of them flipping on an issue like Kagan did?
What comes to mind first is the ethical issues. And you have, for example, Justice Thomas's wife being directly involved in the Stop the Steal efforts in 2020. You see Justice Thomas taking all kinds of trips with donors. And I think that, to me, is very problematic. And I think one of the most disastrous decisions that they've made is around money in politics that has allowed this unlimited amount of spending to happen in our politics. There's even more corruption happening. So I think that, when there's a Republican president, there is a very strong opinion around the federal use of power and the federal government on the part of conservative justices. When there's a Democratic president, there tends to be a lot more of an interest in states' powers and states' rights among conservative justices, and that's where you see the flip-flopping happening.
I mean, I do think it's important to point out that when Thomas had taken a trip with Harlan Crow, which is the billionaire you're referring to, there were no ethical rules related to what he was doing, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a lot of similar issues where she was receiving gifts and trips from wealthy friends. So I don't view that as an ethical issue because it wasn't against the rules at that time. Now, if he were to do it after they revised the rules, that would be a different story. And I also don't think it's fair to conflate what he does with his wife's political activity.
Yeah, well, I think when you run for office or you serve in a position of federal office, you do have to disclose your financial holdings, not only of yourself, but also of any spouses as well. And so there is an idea that, your spouses often can financially profit on decisions being made because there is insider information that you have. So I do think actually spouses are partially responsible for.
Yeah, but your contention was that she was involved in the Stop the Steal protests, not that she had a conflict of interest financially.
Right, but I also think that political actions that spouses are taking, especially when your husband is ruling on a very consequential decision federally for elections, is something that needs to be taken into account. I also take your point that you're right. Taking these trips with major donors, not illegal, but normatively it's wrong. I've been calling for ethics reforms for members of the Supreme Court for a long time. There's a reason why we have gift rules on members of Congress. It just has not been updated to the point where it should apply to Supreme Court justices. But and this is polled as well, if the American people learn about what Supreme Court justices are doing and some of the trips and donor gifts they're able to get, it is obviously corrupt and it should stop.
I think one of the biggest problems for me about the ProPublica reporting about Clarence Thomas is that they were never able to demonstrate that these trips changed his opinion on any case. He was just as conservative before the trips as he was after, and I think has been pretty consistent. Unfortunately, we didn't even have time to get to the parents being allowed to opt out of LGBTQ storybooks in school, age verification laws for porn sites, and Medicaid spending for Planned Parenthood, but hopefully another time. Up next, Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial has been postponed for 2 weeks after a social media post from Donald Trump. We'll talk about it next.
Benjamin Netanyahu calling in the big guns? The Israeli prime minister narrowly avoiding going to trial this week on corruption charges after Trump weighed in, suggesting American aid could hang in the balance if it proceeds.
In a lengthy post on Truth Social Saturday, Trump called Netanyahu a war hero and praised him for the attacks against Iran last week. He continued, writing in part, "Importantly, he is right now in the process of negotiating a deal with Hamas, which will include getting the hostages back. How is it possible that the Prime Minister of Israel can be forced to sit in a courtroom all day long over nothing? It is a political witch hunt, very similar to the witch hunt that I was forced to endure. It is insanity doing what the out-of-control prosecutors are doing to Bibi Netanyahu. The United States of America spends billions of dollars a year, far more than any other nation, protecting and supporting Israel. We are not going to stand for this."
Trump capped it off with a "let Bibi go, he's got a big job to do." A few hours after that post, the Jerusalem District Court, in which Netanyahu is charged, agreed to postpone the prime minister's trial and said Sunday that Netanyahu would not have to testify for the next 2 weeks due to diplomatic and national security interests. It came just 2 days after the judge in the case initially rejected Netanyahu's repeated requests to have the trial delayed.
In response, Netanyahu took to X to thank the president. He wrote, "Thank you again, Donald Trump. Together we will make the Middle East great again." Netanyahu is accused of accepting more than $200,000 from wealthy businessmen and granting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of regulatory benefits to a telecom owner in exchange for favorable news coverage.
The trial has been delayed for 4 years and led many critics of Netanyahu to accuse him of using his power to stall the case. So there are 3 dimensions here for us to look at. So first is what Netanyahu is doing, which he's been doing for a number of years, which is using war to delay these corruption trials. And that, I think, is problematic. Second is what Trump is doing by leveraging his influence and his popularity in Israel to affect the judicial process. Normatively, I think that's also very problematic. That's not a good precedent that we want to be sending. This is an issue for Israelis to be deciding on, not for the United States. But the third piece here is what Netanyahu and Trump might be seeking to do together. And that's where it gets interesting. So we know that Trump is a highly transactional politician in all respects, but definitely when it comes to foreign policy. And when you look at what happened with his support for the Iran bombings and now his support for delaying the corruption case, there's almost certainly something that Trump is getting in return. We know that the conflict in Gaza has been a mess and something that Trump has really sought to clean up. He's very frustrated that it's gone on as long as it has. And I believe that this is now an indication that perhaps there is some visibility into the Gaza conflict ending, or there being at least a ceasefire coming up soon. That's just my prediction based on my understanding of Trump's foreign policy. The other thing to potentially look for here is Netanyahu going to come to the United States for a potential meeting, a potential victory lap here. And if that happens, I think there might be an even larger announcement around Gaza. So for viewers who are at home wondering what's really going on here, know that when Trump is giving Netanyahu essentially a bear hug here, know that he's asking for things in return.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you're probably right that when Trump says that they have to get the hostages back from Gaza, that he is hinting that there is some kind of deal that might be close to being reached, which is why he wants Netanyahu free for now. I do think it's interesting to look at their relationship compared to the first term with the second term. It's been decidedly less cozy, at least from the first few months of Trump's administration. Netanyahu apparently wanted to strike Iran back in May or April or May, and Trump said, no, you can only do it when I'm ready. And that was when he did it in June, and then Trump following up with a strike of his own. But Trump has to be very careful with his general relationship with Netanyahu, even if there have been reports about him being more skeptical of the Israeli prime minister and a bit suspicious about his motivations, and then being willing to negotiate directly with Hamas for the release of that American hostage. A lot of the Republican base, and Trump's base in particular, have similarly suspicious feelings about how much money the U.S. gives to Israel. How does this benefit American interests? Is Israel taking us for a ride and trying to draw us into a major war in the Middle East? And he should heed that, I think, when deciding how to proceed specifically with the Iran situation and how much vocal support he does give to Netanyahu.
Yeah, I think Trump definitely needs to be careful about that. And a couple things here quickly. One is that there's an interesting coincidence that happened that if you look at what was happening in Israeli politics just before October 7th and before the Gaza war, then there were massive protests in the streets. Israel was extremely divided. People were calling for Netanyahu to step down and for these corruption charges to be properly heard. The Gaza war happens, and that all is put on the back burner. That is really problematic, and you always see this constant delay tactic that Netanyahu is using, and now Trump is aiding him in that, and I think that's very problematic. And it's part of the reason why I think war is so often used for unjust and wrong means. And Netanyahu, whose main goal has been self-preservation over the last, for most of his political career, he knows how to use war in his favor. The problem is that a lot of people get killed and hurt in the process.
I thought it was very strange that Mossad has such amazing intelligence capabilities that they were able to literally fly drones through bedroom windows to take out senior military leaders with the Iranian government, and able to tell us exactly how far down in the ground Fordo was and how many scientists were working there and how much uranium had been enriched, and yet they didn't see a bunch of paragliders planning to come across into the country on October 7th.
Right. That to me is extremely questionable, to say the least, for anyone who's been to Israel, and I have, and I've been part of some of the official tours there where you really assess not only what's happening on the ground, but also the security setup that's in the country. Not a lot of things happen unplanned there when it comes to security, especially when you're talking about the Gaza border. I have friends who have crossed that border multiple times, people who do that on a daily basis prior to October 7th. This is not a place where things are just crossing the border without being extremely vetted. So to me, it's extremely questionable. Going back to the Trump part of the story, I think, again, he's very transactional. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. I do think that you're right that his relationship with Netanyahu has been maybe less cozy in this cycle. And I think it's partly because that there's been a real MAGA interest in preventing foreign interventions, and Trump is kind of stuck between Netanyahu and his base on that. Alligator Alcatraz, DHS has a new plan to house migrants. We'll tell you more next. Alligator Alcatraz, Gator Gitmo. There's no shortage of school-grade-like puns about immigration and customs enforcement's latest stunt. The Department of Homeland Security took to X Saturday, posting what appears to be a joke, an AI-generated picture of 4 alligators sporting ice baseball caps lined up outside a prison with the caption reading, "Coming soon."
The post comes on the heels of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' proposal to open up a migrant detention facility in the state's alligator-infested Everglades. A remote airstrip would be turned into the new detention center. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem corroborated the reports of the facility that would be funded through FEMA's Shelter Services Program. The so-called Alligator Alcatraz would cost $450 million.
Joke or not, outside of MAGA world, the plan drew backlash. Hundreds of protesters converged on the highway leading to the airfield as dump trucks hauling materials to the site drove past. In response to DHS's Alligator Alcatraz, podcaster Ryan Sheed posted, quote, we've officially reached the concentration camp part of the Trump presidency, and we're only 159 days in.
Meanwhile, MAGA praised the plan, with right-wing commentator Nick Sortor posting, quote, "Illegals are going from the lush Roosevelt Hotel in New York City to a detention center surrounded by gators. That's what we voted for." What do you think about alligator Alcatraz?
Well, first, a couple things here. We got a comment on their social media manager. This was obviously a complete miss on their part.
I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, look, I get people trying, like, I'm all for making politics fun. That's a big thing I'm trying to do right now. But this is a very serious topic where people are getting snatched from their schools, snatched from Home Depots. And I think this is a human rights issue. And I think it was a complete miss on the part of the social media manager. Now, to get a little bit more into the substance of this, I think, one, we need more processing centers, not more detention
centers. I
centers.
Totally disagree.
I think that when you have that, we do have, now, I'll give Trump credit. I'm coming from the perspective of someone who wants to prevent and stop illegal immigration. And I'll give Trump credit for decreasing that significantly over the last 6 months. It needs to be done humanely. That's where I'm not sure I'm totally on board with everything the Trump administration does. But one of the main issues that we've seen, especially at the border, is that people who are seeking asylum, for example, will then have to wait months, in some cases years, before they can get a proper hearing. So I'm all for more resources so we can have more processing facilities. I think when you look at, these, obviously the social media managers making a comparison to Guantanamo Bay, not a great part of America's record, our human rights record. Guantanamo Bay was used for what they called enhanced interrogation techniques, which was code for torture. Those are things that do not put America on a high moral footing, and according to national security analysts, there was not significant intelligence that they got from using those tactics. Now, at this alligator Alcatraz, or whatever they want to call it,
I don't think they came up with that term, though. Wasn't it critics of the plan that came up with those terms?
That I'm not sure about. The first time I saw it was on the social media post.
Right, because they were sort of poking fun at the critics of comparing it to these things. So that's where I think it was funny, because they were kind of trying to take the air out of this sort of overwrought backlash to what is just a detention facility, which we already have dozens of at the southern border, right? They're typically run by either DHS or HHS if they're for kids. This is just more space to help process people as they're on their way out of the country. People keep calling for more due process. This is how you get it. You have the ability to hold someone while you determine that they are who you say they are, that they are in the country illegally, before they get returned back to their home country. And I think, it is an important distinction, too, between immigration judges and processing centers. Those are two different things. And unfortunately, what we saw during the first Trump administration in 2019, when we looked into the asylum numbers, was that only about 10% of people who were claiming asylum were getting it. So I think the answer is not necessarily more processing of people or allowing people to make more asylum claims, certainly to take the ones that are there and get them done faster so people don't wait years either in a detention facility, or if it was under Joe Biden, they would have an ankle monitor and go somewhere into the U.S. But I think we should actually tighten the asylum restrictions. No more can you cross the border illegally, and then if you're caught by a Border Patrol official, you get to throw your hands up and say, no, I'm claiming asylum, even though you didn't go to a processing facility or you didn't claim in a safe third country like the law requires, and then getting released into the U.S. You have to do it the proper way. And sure, more immigration judges is great, but in terms of the processing, I really think that is not the major problem that we have.
Well, I've worked directly with human rights activists who have sought asylum in our country. This is a very thorough process. As someone who's helped sign off on some of those papers for people.
I agree, the process is thorough, but the problem is that a lot of people take advantage of the asylum claim because they know it takes so long to go to a judge's courtroom, that they believe that they'll get to be able to be released into the U.S. while they wait for that court date. And Trump is saying, no, if you have a legitimate asylum claim, then you can make it the proper way through a port of entry or by submitting your claim from safe third country. but we're no longer going to do the thing where we release you into the United States and you get to live 3-4 years here before you go into a courtroom.
We agree on more immigration judges. Now, with this story, why in the Everglades? Why in this like pretty rural part of the state? I know that Ron DeSantis, I guess, is trying to sort of get back into the national spotlight and say we're going to take this on. $450 million of taxpayer funding. I know that Florida is fronting the cost, but he's expecting to get reimbursed by the federal government. So that's our taxpayer dollars. And I understand this thing's already moving forward. So now the next thing to really watch for are what are the conditions there. I think as the United States, we need to treat people humanely. I disagree with this place being built in the first place, but if it is going to be built, if they are going to be having people there, do they have access to food or do they have access to basic necessities, or are they going to be treated like animals? Because an immigration system that dehumanizes people is not something that is morally right, obviously, but it's something that's also not strategic for the United States over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think we agree that people should have access to food, but I mean, I guess the question would be, is there any evidence that they won't have access to food, or is it just speculation?
Well, I mean, some of the facilities we saw on the southern border in Texas were not humane, so we'll see what happens with this.
All right. Up next, big reveal from President Trump, who says he's found buyers for TikTok. We'll tell you more.
Well, a group of, quote, very wealthy people seems to be interested in buying the U.S. branch of the popular Chinese-owned video app TikTok.
President Trump revealed in an interview on Fox News Sunday that he found a buyer for TikTok, but the deal likely needs Beijing's approval to move forward. Let's watch.
It's like TikTok. I'm extending that, but no big deal. We have a buyer for TikTok, by the way. I think I'll need probably China approval, and I think President Xi will probably do it.
Who's buying?
I'll tell you in about 2 weeks.
A big technology company there.
Very, very wealthy people. It's a group of very wealthy people.
TikTok's fate in the U.S. has been in jeopardy for months now. A law approved in 2024 required the app to be effectively banned in the United States unless its parent company, ByteDance, sold it to a non-Chinese company.
Earlier this month, Trump extended the deadline for ByteDance to divest from the platform's U.S. business. It was the third extension since the Supreme Court upheld the TikTok ban in January. Trump's latest extension requires ByteDance to reach a deal to sell the platform by September 17, 2025. The president has credited TikTok with boosting his support among young voters in the 2024 election.
Some potential buyers that have voiced interest in buying the app include tech giants Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, AppLovin, and Perplexity AI. Well, so a few things here. We've got to recognize what Trump does so many times. If people aren't, following this at home, you got to track the 2 weeks. The 2 weeks.
He loves 2 weeks.
It's always 2 weeks. And when he says 2 weeks, he actually doesn't know. It's usually the case. But 2 weeks, I guess, sounds like a good, reasonable timeline.
It's a fortnight.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to call out the 2 weeks thing first. I think what that really means is he's not entirely sure, but I guess he's had some conversations apparently with people. Now, I think the Democratic Party has been somewhat on the wrong side of this issue in terms of wanting to outright ban TikTok because you not only have people who want to be able to use it and their free speech concerns there, but on top of that, you have a number of people who make their living on social media and on TikTok. I think there's something like 100,000 people in the United States who make their living on social media. So that we don't want to ban it, but at the same time, we do have these national security concerns. We want the company to be owned by a U.S. company. We want the data to be stored in the United States. So I hope someone in the United States is willing to buy it within 2 weeks or longer.
Yeah, look, I think one of the problems is that there have been multiple interested parties, and it seems like ByteDance, and by extension, the CCP, doesn't want to divest. And it's almost like they think that Trump is somehow going to be able to do extensions in perpetuity, which so far, to be fair, he has done 3 when the law only allowed for 1. But ultimately, it is a law, right? Congress would have to go back and repeal this in order for this to just be totally off the table. So it's unclear to me what exactly their game plan is, meaning the Chinese ownership of ByteDance. But it does seem clear to me that perhaps the fact that they're so unwilling to sell indicates that they do see a huge, not just financial advantage, but some kind of national security advantage of having TikTok and using it to either collect data on or spy on Americans.
That should be a huge red flag, absolutely, for Americans of all political stripes. And you're right, this law is on the books. Former Congressman, a Republican, Mike Gallagher, really led the charge on that. He was the head of the China committee in the House previously. And, based on all the intelligence he was gathering, he felt like this bill would be important. Now, the ban went into effect under the Biden presidency. And then in the early days of the Trump presidency, the ban was lifted. And he deserves political chops. I mean, he showed his political chops by, I remember going on TikTok just to see what was going on at that time, and there was a message that popped up saying that it's banned from U.S. users because of this law, and then I think it was 24 hours later, there was a message saying, thanks to President Trump, the United States users can use TikTok again. Again, you have to, I'm not a Trump supporter, but, you got to respect that he knows how to play the game.
Yeah, and look, I remember when the law was first going through Congress, TikTok had those pop-ups, and I'm not on TikTok, but I saw the screenshots on X, so that's how I get my TikTok news. But they had the phone numbers of your local representative that you could call, and we talked to some of the members of Congress who were getting these calls, and they were horrified. They were like, yeah, these kids are calling in saying they're going to kill themselves or unalive themselves, say for YouTube. And it was very disturbing, some of the things that they were saying. So, the kids love their TikTok, to say the least.
The kids certainly do, and obviously the bigger issue here is that if China's unwilling to sell, that's obviously a red flag. I do think they get advantage from the intel they get from it.
That's going to do it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.